hard to believe on a beautiful day like this today that I would want to talk about suffering, because there's so much beauty in this day. It doesn't want you to even think about suffering. But the reality is that in our liturgical season of Lent, we are getting closer and closer to the cross. And of course, the cross is the ultimate symbol of suffering, and Jesus suffering sacrificially for all of us. It also reminds us that suffering is a part of our lives. It's not ordained by God. God doesn't want us to suffer. God doesn't cause us to suffer. And yet, there is meaning in suffering. And we have an opportunity in how we respond to our suffering. The great Christian martyr of the mid-20th century, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, writes this in one of his meditations on the cross about suffering. He says, frankly, God will take no one into his kingdom whose faith has not proven genuine amid tribulation and suffering. And he talks about how many qualities are developed in suffering, and one of those is patience. Patience comes from suffering, he said. The Greek word for patience literally means to stay underneath, to endure, to bear, rather than to cast off one's burden. Today, we in the church know far too little about the unique blessing of enduring and bearing. To bear, not to cast off. To bear, but neither to collapse. To bear, as Christ bore the cross, to endure beneath it, and there underneath to find Christ. When God imposes a burden, those who are patient bend their heads and believe it is good to be humbled, thus to endure beneath this burden, but to endure beneath it, to remain firm, to remain strong as well. That is what the word means, not anemic, giving in, shrinking back, enamored of suffering, but rather to gain strength under that burden as under God's grace, to preserve God's peace with unshakable constancy. God's peace is found among the patient. Indeed, maybe that's the biggest thing we can exemplify in our suffering is patience. How we react to our suffering says a lot about who we are, our character, our commitment to following Christ, our a willingness to endure in really tough times. We each have our own crosses to bear when it comes to suffering, of course. Each of our own sufferings is unique. And yet, through our suffering, there is faith, and there can be peace through our patience as well. As we get closer to the cross during this Lent, our series on the Apostle Peter and how he maneuvered in a faith-filled but also a flawed life continues during our worship on Sunday mornings at 9 and 11. So I'll see you here in the sanctuary or online. In the meantime, I hope you have a restful and blessed rest of your week.